Pierre,
Furkan, how's it going?
good, good. How are you?
Good. This might be the most seamless joining.
I was
Yeah.
actually shocked. That's why I paused for a bit.
You and I both.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, thanks for joining today and
Yeah,
switching things up a little bit. So I appreciate that.
of course.
So yeah, we're talking about instant gratification and discipline today. So it's going to be interesting to see how we go about that. But I prepared some notes. I think around discipline, first of all, I wanted to kind of, there's so many different definitions or interpretations. And the one that I found that at least resonated for me was from the dictionary. So discipline is defined as an orderly or prescribed conduct or pattern of behavior. So let that sink in for a bit. But kind of building on that, and we'll
Hmm.
get into it. So yeah. So maybe
Hmm.
before we get into it, when I suggested this topic, what came up for you? Like what were the feelings that came up, and I guess the motivation around wanting to talk about this today?
Yeah. I think most of what came up for me was personal experience with delayed and instant gratification. And my first thought was really, uh, I can't approach this as somebody who's got tremendous amounts of advice. And I guess I don't normally, and I think we're both kind of on this same page around our our roles in wanting to help other people in the world around us, particularly other men, and knowing that we don't necessarily have to have uh, the right answers or the right advice. In many ways, it's not about having the right answers and knowing that there's not a right answer and knowing that there's not a singular universal bit of advice. This topic feels for me pretty personally challenging and has historically.
Hmm.
And I think we can get into why that might be. Part of
Yeah.
that feels maybe a bit academic and just sort of personal background. Um, but my first thoughts were, boy, I have a lot to learn about being more disciplined myself.
Yeah, yeah, I think there's an aspect of imposter syndrome that kicks in, right? Like,
Yeah,
how can I talk about something that I struggle with? But that in itself is the reason why I wanted to discuss this is, if we all shy away from talking about uh, kind of being disciplined or the challenges we all face with instant gratification, then we all shy away from that topic and
totally.
never really discuss it. So I think it's important, and by no means, to your point, are we claiming that we're experts and we're like these disciplined men. It's more of a kind of a dialogue around what do people think, and we're just sharing our thoughts, but
For
also
sure.
trying to promote conversation around something that I think we all struggle with, on a daily basis. So I think a couple of days ago, I made a post about instant gratification, what that is. And I think the biggest challenge for us, I would suggest, is around social media. And the gratification we get from the likes and the DMs or the followers, and it's an easy trap to fall into. um, but it's something I've been like exploring myself. And the reason why I wanted to pair instant gratification with discipline was, just thinking about uh, all the stories we've heard over the years since we were kids to even now around, and I'm specifically focusing on men. I'm not going to get into
Sure.
uh, women, but like all the men we kind of grew up like as our that were our role models, or that were glorified to a certain extent, whether they were athletes, performers, or even like the great men we heard stories about. They all shared one thing in common from my perspective, and that was discipline. So So anyways, yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
that
just
feels
wanted to throw
important.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I like that. It also strikes me that we don't see a lot of the discipline that was required to have the wins that might have been very visible. Like we don't see the hours of practice. We don't see the decades of work. We just see the sort of the final bit.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
hmm, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it
and I
also
think
kind of got me curious about how we might, I, in this case, I might be underselling myself and I might be, or selling myself short in terms of the sheer amount of discipline that's required to do many of the things that I've done historically. And I imagine that may be true for you as well. Sometimes for me, I get caught in the challenges with navigating instant gratification and and the other part of discipline that I think wasn't included in that dictionary, which is the dictionary's definition, which I think is how do you perhaps show restraint in the face of immediate gratification or something that might provide you immediate gratification in order to continue on the path of engaging in something that you've defined you're going to do. It makes
hmm
me think of like choosing to work out versus choosing to eat a cookie. And it's very like it's a very basic, I suppose, um, consideration, but there is a level of restraint that I was fascinated to not hear in the definition
yeah,
of discipline.
yeah. It makes me laugh. I think it was a Harvard study, if I'm not mistaken, around the marshmallow study. Are you
Yeah,
familiar with that one?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that's along the same lines. I remember hearing about it, and it was funny because, and for people that aren't aware, the study very quickly involved um, the the researchers giving the participants, which were kids. I can't remember the age. Maybe it was like 4 or 5.
Very young. Yeah.
Yeah, and placed a marshmallow in front of these kids and said, okay, well, if you eat this, this is all you get. But if you wait 15 minutes, then you get two marshmallows. And then it was a longitudinal study. So these kids were then followed throughout their lives. And the ones that waited the 15 minutes typically ended up being more successful. Now, success in my mind is also very subjective and relative. So,
Yeah.
but for the most part, did really well in their lives, right? So I experimented with my son
Yeah.
when,
How
when
do you
he was
do?
5. Yeah, he actually passed, so I was very proud.
Beautiful.
but it's funny to see those things, right? And the reason why I bring that study up is Jordan Peterson talks about it a little bit too. But there's this the flip side of instant gratification or discipline or the concept of delayed gratification. The argument is, well, I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years from now. So like if I'm sacrificing this whatever whatever fun or pleasure you're sacrificing in the moment, the argument is, well, is that really going to pay off? And I could look at examples in my life where maybe things didn't pay off as I expected.
Hmm.
But I think there's something to be said about being disciplined because the reward is always there, and it depends how you interpret it, right? So that's kind of my take on it.
Hmm.
But talking about discipline, I came across this article that Brent Gleason did in Forbes, and he talks about different steps you can take to bring discipline into your life. And I wanted to maybe touch on all of those because I feel
Yeah, that'd be
they're
great.
relevant. The first one is around self-awareness. So knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and we all have our own weak points when it comes to pleasure or gratification. I can name various things where I find myself tempted. The temptation's there. Sometimes I'll succumb to it, and other times I'm able to restrain myself. But those are the moments where we're really tested. So, kind of want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think self-awareness is really it's a critical one here, not only to know maybe what are the challenging points for seeking instant gratification or where where you might fall short or succumb to an instant gratification and fall off of the wagon in terms of your discipline, but also
Hmm.
too that right, that equation around shoring up the gratification or shoring up the work in order to later experience the gratification versus just having gratification, experiencing gratification more immediately. That's a very personal, like that line is very personal. I think not only to us individually and our own individual values, but also at our stage in life and what the priorities are in our lives and the circumstances. I mean, my level of delayed versus instant gratification now is very, very different than perhaps 20 years ago.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
And in some ways it's like more in line with a disciplined delay of gratification. In some ways it's actually quite the opposite. And I'm
Hmm.
curious how like that, maybe it's depending on very much on, I'm just thinking about like 20 years ago for me, it feels like I'm dating myself here, but 20 years ago I was in medical school and, and that experience, the experience of medicine, I think on the whole is all about delaying gratification and postponing joy in many ways.
Hmm.
And it's a process, I think, that becomes so ingrained that oftentimes physicians who are well into their practices have difficulty enjoying themselves and experiencing more immediate gratification or taking the steps that might be necessary to cut back on their work. We see it a
Hmm.
lot in burnout. I'm thinking, especially in healthcare professionals, but right
Yeah.
now, in this time, um, that's huge. And so part
Yeah.
of it, it feels like our personal values that may not shift, they're immutable. But I think all values, obviously, they'll evolve and change over the course of our lives. And so that dichotomy or the fine line between where you will, what the line that you opt to draw in terms of delayed versus instant gratification really dictates how you show up in a disciplined way. And I don't think that is a universal line.
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely. And I think even when you make those choices in the moment, it's being conscious of your choices, right? Like there's times where if I do, indulge or knowing full well that okay, I'm not being disciplined, it's also being aware that hey, I'm going to pay the price. Maybe tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now, but being aware of it
Yeah.
and make that conscious choice. So I do that because I think it's also about balance, right? And finding that right balance is key. But yeah, I mean, I've had a similar experience going through university. I remember, my friends like, a lot of times university is the time where you really go out and party. And I remember sitting in the library with my head buried in the books while these guys were having fun, and often even questioning those choices, saying, oh, hey, like, am I missing out on something? But I had a goal in mind that I wanted to achieve, and that's what kept me focused and motivated. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but it's kind of along the lines of what I want to dig into is when you kind of set a goal or have a vision, it's easier to stay in that lane.
Mm.
With the occasional, I think, occasionally you are going to fall out of it, and that's normal because we are human
Yep.
beings. And but as long as you know what that lane is, it's easier to stay within it. So yeah, so building on the self awareness, I think not only knowing what your temptations are, I mean, one of the things that was covered in this article was remove your temptations, which I can agree with.
Hmm.
And I think it's like, if you know you have a tendency or for cookies, like you said, or you have a sweet tooth, perhaps not keeping that stuff in your home.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, so one of the things I do is, I've gotten a lot better at it, but I will, buy stuff like that for my son. Obviously, he's a
Yeah.
kid, but keep it far away where it is a bit of a hassle to get access to. I mean, I could still get it, but it's just the fact that mentally I know it'll require an extra effort to access candy or whatever sweets.
Yeah.
I don't tend to go for it. Um, so there's an aspect of that in removing temptations, but you also have to be realistic that you're not going to remove temptations altogether. Like there's going to be situations that you can't control and you're going to be tempted, but being aware of it. So I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think I I have often, in looking at my own responses to temptation, recognized sometimes that moderation is not moderation has been a challenge for me throughout much of my life. I think it's something that um, appreciating sort of being in the gray zone around not having to go all in with a temptation. Um, I think that's a newer found experience for me. But usually, if I know I really like something and I know it's going to throw me off track, I've,
Mm-hmm.
I've, I have to, or I choose to not be in proximity because I know that my bar for seeking more instantaneous gratification tends to veer towards, you know, the candy, quite
Yeah, yeah.
frankly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So like that stuff has to just not be in my presence, else it's going to be, I'm not one of those guys who can like take a little bit of a little
yeah.
piece of the candy or a piece of the chocolate and put the rest in a cupboard for next week. That's not generally been my experience. But I mean, to your point, having a vision in mind, it becomes a lot easier when I'm moving toward that vision
Yeah,
to
yeah,
maintain some delay of gratification, to stay on a path, to stay consistent with actions. And I think having a vision is really great, but also moving towards it in tangible ways actually feels like there's skin in the game around it. And so I think we can all sort of the analogy that comes to mind here is, when you spend an hour or two at the gym every day, it becomes a whole lot easier to avoid the cookie or the biscuit. I mixed my
yeah,
words there.
yeah,
But it becomes a
yeah,
lot easier to avoid temptation when you're actually
yep,
walking, doing even small things to walk the path toward
yeah,
that vision. Yeah,
yeah.
and
And
Nate's
Nate,
mentioning, yeah, go
I've
for it.
actually, yeah, I just read about that recently, and it's interesting that when these soldiers are no longer around the temptation and the triggers, they actually were able to avoid it and not succumb or even engage in like the heroin in that case. I think it was more the environment that caused them to indulge. So we'll get into the environment piece here. The one thing, maybe just food for thought. So I think we agree on removing the temptations. And once you're living in alignment with your clear vision, then you're able to fight those urges and have that willpower, as Nate also brought up. But one of the things I was thinking is like, in psychology or when we're doing therapy, there's an aspect or a branch of CBT that talks about exposure therapy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have this fear that, hey, this is going to happen, or I'm going to react this way when I'm exposed to this threat. And the more you expose yourself slowly, you realize that a lot of it is your imagination or something you've made up. Do you feel like from an exposure side, and I've experienced this, the more I'm able to expose myself to the temptation and fight the urge, the more I feel comfortable around it, and it doesn't even bother me anymore through slow, gradual exposure.
Yeah, I think so. I think for starters, if I were to think about the actual exposure itself, and usually a gradual exposure allows you to recognize that certain experiences inside are going to emerge. Thoughts will emerge, judgments will emerge, sensations will emerge, anxiety in particular, um, will emerge. And rather than engage in a particular task to reduce it or to take it away instantaneously, we're allowing ourselves just to be present to the experience and recognize that the natural cycle of something like anxiety or even judgment will be that it will naturally dissipate.
Mm-hmm.
And so add to that I think you then restructure your your thoughts or your judgments to recognize too that perhaps you don't like perhaps the instant or sort of the instantaneous action is not going to be to consume it all. And Nate mentions an important point. Sounds like playing with fire. Yeah, I think in some cases there are there are temptations that we can completely avoid. In many cases, though, there are going to be some that are unavoidable. Like
Right.
for me, going into certain stores, uh, especially ones that have like an electronics section in the US, that's Target. If I go into like a store with a like great electronics section, I'm gonna be tempted, and I can't entirely avoid the stores. You know, what I mean, I gotta
Yeah.
get, you know, medicines and stuff. But
Yeah.
there is something to be said for recognizing there are urges might um, that might emerge for me to get something instantaneously. And usually that's
Mm-hmm.
like, for me, that's often the sense I need something. Like this
Yeah.
is so cool. If I had it, something in my life would be different.
Mm-hmm.
And in those
Mm-hmm.
cases, I recognize too, it's not so much, and Nate, you're absolutely right. The gradual exposures are really valuable for reducing phobias. In many
Yep.
ways, recognizing the urge to engage in something instantaneously, letting that urge perhaps subside naturally um, in the presence of something that you really want, I think
Mm-hmm.
is very similar to that. And it's not saying that
Yeah.
you necessarily have to go out and expose yourself to candy just to see that you're capable of holding back. But it is
Yeah.
to say there are certain circumstances that are going to come up in life that are going to be tempting in ways
Right.
that are unavoidable. And I think
Yeah.
that recognizing when the temptation emerges, when the urge emerges, that will also subside um, if you let it, rather
Right.
than acting out and sort of purchasing something or doing something that might feel really good in the moment, but may not serve your values later.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it goes back to having some self-awareness too. Like, if like when I go grocery shopping on an empty stomach, I'm picking up junk food
Bad
a
news.
lot of the time. So,
Yeah.
so it's just being aware. I think moving on to the third piece, we touched on it, but in order to be disciplined, having a clear vision of what your goals or kind of vision is for life, and then similar to what we've discussed, it allows you to stay in your lane most often. So we'll kind of move on to the next piece, and that's what he talks about is practicing daily diligence. And I think that's, for me, what comes up is I recently read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and I think
Yep.
the daily diligence, and we'll talk about habits as well, but it's really what he describes as habit stacking. So daily diligence. So if you're really trying to build discipline, is trying to stack all the good habits together. So I don't know if that's something
Mm,
that
interesting.
resonates for you. Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you actually do that? Like, how do you
Well,
stack them temporal, like you stack them in time or in
yeah, I
space? How
think
does that work?
well, I think in time more so like trying to do things, uh, building habits upon habits that are good. Like, so for example, for me now, I've started doing this cold plunge practice. So for me, the way I
Oh,
stack it is
cool.
after a hard workout, like I'll go really hard, push myself. And then for me, it's like, okay, now the next step is the recovery. And obviously the first few times I went, I was like, not looking forward to it. I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? And
Yeah.
even now, occasionally, I'm like, okay, I'm not really looking forward to it. But once I take that plunge, 30 seconds later, I'm grateful. But it's part of the routine now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like on a daily basis, building that diligence of holding myself accountable, and knowing that, okay, well, if I'm doing these set of habits, I also need to do the self care
Hmm.
um, as part of it.
Yeah, I like that. Well, the part that feels most resonance, just like getting in the sort of expecting the next thing will be this without much thought. I mean, it's sort of like reducing the number of different choices that you could have to not undertake something that you've defined that you want to
Hmm.
undertake. There
Yeah,
is an
and then it
element, I think, of accountability and integrity there. I like that.
and, and then it also becomes automatic, right? Like the more
Hmm.
it's routine based, and I know like it could be mundane, or you're saying, okay, well, you're building a routine, but I think there's something to be said about having that routine that keeps you disciplined.
For sure. Well, I mean, discipline is nothing if not the act of whatever it is that you intend in this case. And so um, it's we could have like lots of academic discussions about what discipline is, but ultimately,
Yeah.
if you're engaging in the actions that you intend to engage for the reason that you've defined, then oh, thanks, Jimmy. Um, then you're in essence acting in accordance with discipline.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of again fits into number five, which is new habits and rituals. So that's kind of what
Yeah.
that alludes to is you're creating new habits and then you're building a ritual around it, right? So the other example I can think of for myself is so for me, I've talked about this, prioritizing sleep was huge. So then over time, I started building a ritual around even winding down an hour prior. So I have this ritual now of before I go make the intention of going to sleep, I've got this
Uh-huh.
1 hour ritual that allows me to get into sleep mode. So yeah, I think that's kind of what that means to me. Just
Hmm.
want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, what is yeah, it's sort of preparation to engage in an important task.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, it could be anything. Like for me, uh, like I mentioned earlier, another ritual is self-care for my body
Mhm.
after workouts or playing sports. It's like going for yoga, getting massages. Like there's a whole ritual around it now
Yeah.
that keeps me like focused and disciplined. So
Yeah. Interesting. I like that. I think the sort of expectation part, yeah, I feel very much as a creature of habit. I could probably do, and this is more true probably around food, but there are certain things that I really like um, that just feel very comforting. And I do think that having this sort of expectation of this happens before doing something really important just allows the familiarity and comfort of it to come
mhm.
through. It's like reducing the resistance that might show up, whether that's internal or things around you. Um,
Yep.
you're just increasing the likelihood of engaging in the habit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think Nate touches on the reward piece as well, being
yeah,
mindful of how, I think there's a tendency that, oh, I went for a workout, so now I can justify going out for drinks, which
yeah,
is counterproductive in a way. So
yeah.
being mindful of the rewards you're setting up as well to maintain that discipline. But but yeah, moving on to number six, he says change your perception about willpower. So when I read into that, what he meant was there's this tendency that we tell ourselves, "Hey, I'm I only have a finite amount of willpower within me," which is not true. I think it's all mindset as well, but just having that change in your perception in
Hmm.
terms of willpower. So I don't
Hmm.
know what that brings up for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, willpower is sort of like, I don't know, it's kind of become a little bit of a four-letter word in some circles. I think uh, part of it, and maybe it's just the seeing it as somehow an immutable trait that you either have it or you don't. It's on a binary. You can't necessarily cultivate it. Well, I mean, technically, if you set an intention and you undertake it and you're building habits to do it over and over again, you've built the discipline, which is in essence the sort of embodiment of what we might think about as willpower, as though we sort of
Hmm.
own something within us that moves us forward, um, that moves us forward to do anything. I don't think that that's really the case. Like my discipline to work out is going to be very, very different than, maybe my discipline to write. Though they're kind of similar. I'm trying to find something else here, but I like my discipline to do laundry might
Yeah.
be a little bit different than like I care about my laundry. Like I don't want to smell, um, and also it is just it's not implicit to how I define myself. In a lot of ways, it's not, if I decide not to wash my clothes and just move on to wear a different t-shirt, that's fine. It's not a huge deal. But um, if I decide to skip a couple of days of writing, then I've lost track or I've fallen off track in terms of a goal that feels really important to me, and they can't
Hmm.
necessarily make up those days. And so my degree of willpower in both of those, whatever willpower I suppose means, is naturally going to be different because it's
Hmm.
not really just something innate that I offer to everything that I do. My degree of discipline for each of the two is going to be defined by the vision, how important the task is and the final outcome is, and even how important the process is. And Nate's brought up a really good one. Ugh.
Yeah.
Screen time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
tough one. We can touch upon it.
Well, I think for me, yeah, I get the weekly shameful reminder from my phone how
Ugh.
much screen, but it's a good
Yeah.
reminder because it does allow me to be more mindful of it. And I think when it comes to willpower, what comes up for me around that, you know, perception around willpower is there's certain things that are going to test me more than others, right? And I think for your example, the writing example, if there's a level of procrastination happening, maybe you need to ask yourself, is this the right goal for me?
Mhm.
For me, I believe like if you're truly passionate about something, you're gonna make it happen. But yeah,
Thanks,
well, I'm
Nate.
glad Nate's got someone reminding him.
Yeah.
So we'll
Built in
touch on that as
accountability.
well. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think there is a certain sense of different things in our lives that will test us and will require more willpower than others.
Yeah, agreed.
Um, but I think to your point, the reason I believe you were struggling with finding another example is I think once you're in that zone of being disciplined, then it all comes together. and I feel like you're
Yeah.
able to maintain willpower in many aspects of your life.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um,
That's fair. I
yeah.
mean, yeah, I think that's an important counterpoint that willpower, while it's sort of ill-defined and sometimes we can articulate that we either have it or we don't, there is something similar to the actions that are required to maintain discipline in one arena versus another. But I think to your point too, um, there may be internal pushes in different degrees between different tasks and goals. For me, if I just look at writing, the I I think this is a really strong and important area for me. What I think gets often in the way is the internal resistance around things like limiting beliefs.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that that's another element too. There are limiting beliefs that might take us off track. And for
Right.
me, with writing, that is often perfectionism. And
Absolutely.
and so it does mean like there are internal experiences that need to be explored in those moments, or at least questioned. I don't dig too deeply into my own, I have dug pretty deeply into my own perfectionism historically. It's still there, it's not going away. But it does then raise the question of what's taking me off of my game in terms of discipline? Like, what are the stories I'm telling myself that are throwing me off?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
they're often judgments. And I think that that's often where willpower comes in to the detriment of us. That we
Yes.
say, I just don't have the willpower that's required, and so therefore I'm weak. And so I'm going to
Hmm.
judge myself, and that judgment is going to then lead me to feel like I need something, stability, safety, love, acceptance. And in the moment, that those are often the moments in which I'm most tempted to engage in something that's instantaneously um, that's really provides some instant gratification.
Hmm.
That might also throw me off track. It's like it ends up being this cycle of um,
That's
perpetuating a falling off of discipline.
right. It's validating your limiting belief,
Yeah,
as you
totally.
mentioned. So you touched on, which is probably a good segue into the next point. I guess number seven. Um, Basically, what he says is give yourself a backup plan. But the way I look at it is
I like that.
be prepared for setbacks, because those are going to happen. So now you have a vision, you're disciplined. And I touched on it earlier. The argument around instant gratification often is, well, if I'm sacrificing this pleasurable thing now, what's the guarantee that it's going to pay dividends in the future? It may not. But however, you need to be prepared for setbacks. So, I'm going to be disciplined. And I mean, like, athletes prepare for races or sporting events, and, they probably worked harder than most people and still end up losing. So does that mean all that discipline was for nothing? So
Hmm.
having that mindset that there are going to be setbacks, and what I try to remind myself is trust the process, not the outcome.
Hmm.
And there is some form of gratification that comes from even just trusting in the process and sticking with it despite the outcome. Now, the outcome may not be rewarding. So how do you prepare for that? So I just want to throw
Yeah,
that out there.
I love that. I think this is such an important topic that that feels fundamental to creating and building discipline. That if the only focus is on an outcome that you're trying to control, you have a vision for what you want to do in a very specific way, you might actually lose sight of the the value, the benefit of your own setbacks, especially if you're so wedded to controlling the outcome
Mm-hmm.
that um, that you find yourself, and I do this a lot, I find myself riddled with guilt the day after I didn't do something that I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell myself all these things about who I am and what this means about me, and that I might not deserve or reach the outcome, rather than just getting back on track, perhaps even
Mm-hmm.
seeing what was gained because of the derailment.
Right.
It's
Right.
almost like I had a conversation yesterday. It was a great conversation. Um, and one point felt really important. It was made by a really great guy who said, um, I want to maintain my power while recognizing that I need to give up control. And I think sometimes there's this sense that power and control go together, and that I want to control the outcome. And if somehow the outcome doesn't look like it's going to happen, or it doesn't feel like it's happening quickly enough, you give up the power and say, I can't do this. And the reality is these setbacks, they're natural. They're the setbacks we all face. And most achievements are not linear. And so recognizing how the derailments can actually serve us, that the derailments are just part of the process. Um, they may actually fuel us in a lot of ways
Yeah.
or inform us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think there's a lesson there to be taken. It's obviously easier said than done because often, if you work so hard for something and it's not
Yeah.
the outcome you wanted, it could be devastating. And, there's examples of people that do rally around that and persevere. And there's examples that where people do get derailed and from that devastation. And I've seen both ends of it. Um, I've
Same.
experienced I've experienced it myself where, you work so hard for something and then, it's easy to get lost in the outcome and even question your motives and blame others.
Hmm.
So just being mindful of that. And some of the things you touched on, I'll skip number 8, but jump to number 9, which is the last one. We'll come back to 8. Number 9 says, forgive yourself and move on. Now, that's again, sounds very simplistic,
So
but it is, and I think it goes back to thanks, Joe. Yeah, there is a
thank you,
huge
Joe.
distinction between power versus control. Um, there is. I mean, we touched on this in our one of our last lives or the one before around self forgiveness, and you touched
Yeah.
on it in this one as well, um, around perfectionism, right? So it's really questioning that.
Mm.
But yeah, to me, I'll repeat something I said in that live is reminding myself that I am doing my best and also seeing kind of putting it all together in the sense that knowing I'm doing my best, I've got a vision, um, and around discipline of I know what the process, right? Again, it's trusting the process and not getting too attached to the outcomes. And that's really helped me personally. It's changed my mindset. And
Hmm.
there's a sense of gratitude just being able to live that process out day in, day out and kind of being open to whatever outcome may happen.
Mm.
Um, Again, it is a daily battle, but just being grateful for going through the motions and being a part of the journey, regardless of where the destination ends up being. So,
Ditto. I will piggyback on that to say it is a constant battle, I think, or a constant challenge to self-forgive and be um, perhaps gracious to ourselves. Um, hmm. One that I think is ongoing,
yes,
and one that I think will come up again, no doubt, in other lives. It feels like
absolutely.
it's a through line to a lot of the work that we do individually for us and with ourselves, but also with other men.
And
Yeah.
I've had instances even in the last couple of weeks. In fact, a couple of nights ago, I uh, fell off, like, didn't stick to my routine, and I did feel an immense sense of guilt. But I had to really stop myself and be like, okay, you know, this is a process, and everything we've talked about thus far, there are going to be setbacks, and changing my mindset around, you know, because I'm all about streaks. I'm like, oh, this is a good streak, keep it going, keep it going. But streaks are meant to be broken, and changing that mindset around, okay, well, this is an opportunity now for me to start a new streak, or not even
Yeah.
looking at it as a streak, but like being like, okay, here's an opportunity to start again and continue to push myself, knowing full well that I may need to reset again, whether it's in a week, a month, or whatever, but
Hmm.
having that awareness, and I think there comes a piece of grace with it, because you're not getting stuck again on the outcome.
Hmm. Yeah, well, streaks are in essence just minor outcomes. They're just sub outcomes, and it's helpful, I think, to see progress, but
Mm-hmm.
also uh, also focusing on the streak then means if you break it, there's some feeling of immense regret or shame that somehow creates resistance for to getting just back on track.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow you're recreating something when really it's just a matter of each day being its own thing.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess too, thinking about the whole outcome bit, often when I worked really hard to reach an outcome, rather than to focus on building the habits and appreciating the process of it, once that outcome is reached, I feel this immense like end point where it's harder than to just continue doing what I'm got accustomed to doing, and it feels like there's more resistance to moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
It's often the feeling that I get when I train for something that's longer, like a Spartan or
Yeah.
a Mutter, that
Yeah.
somehow I get into the routine of being very, very rigid around the number of days that I've worked out and how hard I work out, and then it happens and I just stop. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've generally stopped doing things like feeling uh, having to like cross off certain days, like um, certain routines that require every real rigidity, or that somehow encourage rigidity. Because I also recognize that the habits that I'm trying to build now, they don't necessarily take me to a defined and concrete endpoint. They're habits that I want to build and continue to engage in. They're
Mm-hmm.
habits
Mm-hmm.
of fitness, of writing, of helping, of service. None of those things is going to go away after I write a book or after
Yeah.
I do a 10-week workout plan. It's all going to continue.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that has been a big change for me. It's been a recognition of not focusing so much attention on the outcome, but really on the process. And that's been a really big mindset shift, and not one that has happened, certainly not one that has happened overnight.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fair. I recently heard an analogy around mountains, but
Mm,
just for the sake of time, I won't get too much into it, but it's around the peaks and the valleys, right?
yeah.
So, you know, every mountain, you may hit the peak, but then if you want to climb another one, you're starting again from the bottom, right? So
Mhm.
it's working your way up, and to your point, when you do achieve that, it's not letting go and knowing, just having that humility that you're going to be starting from the bottom again for
Totally.
whatever.
I love that.
um the last point that I skipped, but coming back to it, is around having coaches or mentors. I would, however, extend that, also around the people you surround yourself with, which is
Yeah.
something I've taken back. And again, we've touched on, and Nate shared also some things from the book Atomic Habits. It's in order to be disciplined and kind of be in line with your vision. I believe you also need to surround yourself with the people that also believe in those values and have a similar vision, then it's easier to stay disciplined because now you're all kind of working towards a common goal.
Mhm.
So yeah, you can have coaches or mentors that are helping you, but at the same time, you've also got a community of people who are thinking the same way or are seeking the same type of vision. So then
Mhm.
together you can stay in that lane. So I'll kind of
Yeah, and
like,
they're supporting you. And that the
absolutely.
community piece feels so important,
Yes. Yeah.
critical. Yeah, I'm with you. It's helpful to have individuals to whom you turn. I think the everyday experience is one of staying the course or um, potentially deviating, and having a community of people around you to that share the same or similar values and want to see you succeed feels incredibly powerful.
And one of the things I'll kind of end off with is, even in your community, people like even my friends or family, like they may not agree with how I'm living my life, or they may
Hmm.
not see the value in it, or they may question my
Sure.
choices. But as long as they're supportive and they respect it, that also helps, right? Because then I'm pretty honest. I'll be like, hey, if you guys don't respect my choices, then probably best we don't spend time together,
Yeah,
or at least
fair.
a whole lot of time, because I'll pull back. But so it's being able to have that energy and alignment in your life, and that also extends to your social circle and the people you surround yourself with. So
Agreed. Yeah,
yeah,
that feels that feels really powerful, really
yeah,
resonant as well for me.
yeah, yeah, and that's why I enjoy these conversations, Pierre.
Yeah,
So
likewise.
thanks, thanks for
Likewise.
sharing this. Thank you for sharing the space again with me. Again, appreciate um, these conversations, and I think fatherhood is something you want to touch on in one of our next lives. So
Yep.
we'll have to figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah, we
Yeah.
will. And you know, I am not a father, and also it's a, an important part of life that for me has drawn me into working with men. Not everyone with whom I work is a father, and um, at the same time, a lot of my initial work with parents, um, with moms initially, led me
Hmm.
to a strong interest in working with dads. And so I probably will have more questions for you than the other way around.
Well, I
But
don't.
but I'm certainly happy to share my own experiences with working with fathers, and also engaging in a fair amount of research over the last 18 months into the psychological experiences that are associated with fatherhood, which I think
Hmm.
are not touched on very frequently. So
Absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that one.
Yeah, as am I.
Yeah,
I won't have all the answers for you, I can tell you that, but
no one does.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So,
and it's all about having the right questions anyway. So
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm
Well,
for it.
thank you again, Pierre. Thank you, everyone that
Thanks for coming.
joined and engaged. Always appreciate everyone's participation in these, listening to us just ramble on. But yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you.
Yes, Nate, I am a dad.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
We'll see you. Bye for
All right.
Ken.
Take
Bye,
care.
everybody. Thanks for
Yeah.
joining.